We have tweets, of course, coming from our fellow South Africans. Surely being ever so patriotic about the national anthem, winning the #1 anthem in the world. This one coming from Baba saying, Mina, I'm happy. It's true. In South Africa, it's true. That's a lingo for I'm telling the truth. So
Tadwa says, from something that started as a prayer in the darkest time for us to being recognized internationally, wow. What our anthem stands for is beautiful.
Yep.
The diversity in languages really does represent us. I applaud Enoch Sontonga, CJ Langenhoven. And of course, yeah, it was a mix from both of them.
This one coming from Dr. Moses Villani saying good news for the country and Sontonga must be smiling in heaven.
Good one, Doc, for this morning. And the last one coming in here, I hear most of the people are saying it's Rainbow Nation. I feel left out. Where is Chivenda part? I'm not celebrating. Reconciliation chooses Afrikaans and disregards Benda, Tonga and Khoisan. Well, possibly when there's a remix or a new version of the Nkosi
Now with us having 11 official languages, so how long is that national anthem going to be if we were to add
don't know, put everybody in. Yeah, that's true.
Wow.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm Shante Yankees.
And from the sports desk, my name is Marumo Kekan. Good morning to you.
First up, let's have a look at your Friday morning headlines. The Constitutional Court is expected to rule today on whether Parliament should start impeachment proceedings against President Jacob Zuma. In financial news, the Automobile Association says petrol can be expected to decrease by up to 34 cents a litre, diesel by 26 cents and illuminating paraffin by 28 cents in January. And former star footballer George Weah has been named the winner of Liberia's presidential election, sparking off wild celebrations across the West African country. Final results will only be released today. And standing by with your sports, Marumo Kekana takes us through your headlines.
Indeed, like we did say earlier on, everywhere across the world, everyone is now watching it. Either you're watching EPL or you're watching cricket. And here in South Africa, we are into cricket. What we're talking about from the sports desk of Force, Australia made a never start, losing 2 wickets as they reduced the England lead to 94 runs on the 4th day of their 4th Ashes Test in Melbourne this morning. The tourists, with all the momentum after Alistair Cook's record-breaking inning of 244 not out, snared the wickets of Cameron Bancroft and Usman Khawaja to send the Jitters through the home side. At lunch, the Australians were 70 for 2 with David Warner and Steve Smith at the crease. In the football news, Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger equaled Manchester United legend Sir Alex Ferguson's Premier League record of 810 matches in charge when his side beat Crystal Palace by 3 goals to 2. A brace in 4 minutes from Alex Sanchez, who contracted expires at the end of the season, killed Palace's resolve. James Tompkins' header with a minute to go was late for any comeback to materialize for the host. Of course, I'll be back with this and more during the sports bulletin. But first, Miss Yankees is standing by with your headlines.
Thank you very much, Marum. Well, let's have a look at your top story this morning. The Constitutional Court is expected to rule today on whether Parliament should start impeachment proceedings against President Jacob Zuma. The EFF, UDM and COPE approached the court in September, seeking an order to direct Parliament to consider whether Zuma's conduct was impeachable. Well, this follows the 2016 Constitutional Court ruling that the President failed to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution when he did not adhere to the remedial actions called for by former Public Protector Thuli Madonsela. Well, this was after more than 200 million rand of public money was spent in upgrading his Nkandla home.
If the motion of no confidence or the motion of removing the president by the DA had succeeded, that would have constituted holding the president to account, would it?
Yes, indeed.
This is the first hurdle the parties face. After the Nkandla judgment, the DA pushed for motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma, but it was unsuccessful. The EFF argues that the motion was premature.
I would submit with respect to Justice Chafter, whether you do attribute that process to the National Assembly or you don't, actually does not answer the case of the EFF before this court, because the case of the EFF before this court is that there has been a failure of the duty to scrutinize, and there's therefore been a failure of the duty to hold to account.
The EFF and the UDM want the president to appear before an ad hoc committee which will have the powers to subpoena witnesses. Counsel representing the Speaker of Parliament argued that the Constitution is not explicit on what mechanisms should be employed in case of a violation.
And it doesn't say if in particular circumstances, if you don't impeach, you have not held the president to account. That's not what the Constitution does.
And then a second hurdle for the opposition parties. They will need at least a 2/3 majority to have the president impeached. This is more demanding than the 50% plus 1 needed in a motion of no confidence. All 8 have failed previously. But unlike before, this time around, President Zuma is no longer the leader of the ANC. Aldrin Simpier, SABC News, Johannesburg.
For the latest on the expected Constitutional Court ruling today on whether Parliament should start impeachment proceedings against President Jacob Zuma, we're joined by Aldrin Samper. Very good morning to you, Aldrin. Essentially, what can one expect from the Constitutional Court when they deliver judgment on the matter?
Well, yes, good morning. The first thing that we expect the court to look into is that the declaratory order that has been sought by the opposition parties, that the Speaker of Parliament and the National Assembly as the legislature has failed to hold the President accountable for the debacle around Nkandla. Remember that this court found that the President failed to defend, uphold and respect the Constitution. So we need a declaratory order on that. That's the first thing that they're seeking. But also the other one is the establishment of an ad hoc committee, which is something quite interesting. The establishment of an ad hoc committee would mean if Parliament does start the impeachment proceedings and there's an establishment of this ad hoc committee, that ad hoc committee would have this powers to subpoena witnesses. The likes of President Jacob Zuma would be called to come and testify, and will be cross-examined. And one can only imagine the reputational damage that the ANC as a party would be suffering from such a cross-examination of its former leader, the ANC president, the former ANC president, but who's also the current deployee of the ANC to the highest office in the land. And then on the other side, you have people like Thuli Madonsela, who investigated the Nkandla saga, that report of a Secure and Comfort. She could also be called to testify before that multi-party organization. But as you just heard, multi-party committee rather, and as you just heard in that insert where Justice Chris Jafta asked the question around the motion of no confidence that was tabled by the DA, had that motion of confidence been successful, wouldn't that mean that the president had already been held accountable? And Nukaitobi, who's representing the EFF, conceded and said yes, indeed, it would have meant that. However, though, they are stressing that in terms of Section 89 of the Constitution, there must be a fact-finding mission, and that fact-finding mission can only be done through an ad hoc committee that needs to be established. Initially, the EFF, when they wrote to the Speaker of Parliament, wanted 3 retired judges to set up a commission to head that sort of commission that will look into the conduct of the president and whether he's fit and proper to hold office.
Now, Aldrin, what would the implications be of ruling in favour against the applicants?
Can you just repeat that question?
Essentially, what are the implications going to be in ruling of favour against the applicants?
Well, a ruling in favour of the applicants, then that would mean, of course, that there will be this declaratory order, first of all, that the Speaker of Parliament, Baleka Mbete, has failed yet again. Remember, in the Nkandla judgment, the court had already found that the Speaker had failed, or the National Assembly at least had failed to hold the executive accountable. Remember that there was the ad hoc committee that was set up, and that ad hoc committee essentially set aside the findings of the public protector, and this court found that that ad hoc committee doesn't have such powers to set aside the findings of the public protector. It's only a court of law that can review and set aside the findings of the public protector. So certainly we'll get a declaratory order. That's if the applicants are successful. And of course, again, it's again a reputational damage for the ANC, because this is the ANC's former chairperson, who also remains the Speaker of Parliament, who is a deployee of the ANC. And then on the other hand, of course, as I've just explained, that there will be the ad hoc committee, the multi-party ad hoc committee that is established, that is a trial-like committee that will have the powers to subpoena certain witnesses to appear before it, and that finding will then have to be debated before Parliament, and of course the impeachment proceedings will start from that point. But as we've indicated, unlike a motion of no confidence against the president, when you only need 50% plus 1 majority, this time around with the impeachment, you need at least a 2/3 majority. And President Jacob Zuma has already survived at least 8 motions of no confidence. It would be a bit difficult for the opposition to really convince the ANC why it should vote with it in this impeachment, because you need the 2/3 majority. But as I've indicated before as well in the other crossings this morning, is there are these talks on people saying within the ANC that the president should rather resign and save himself the embarrassment of having to be impeached in Parliament, because that would mean that he will forfeit all his benefits.
Now, Aldrin, can you underline the main difference between a motion of no confidence and impeachment?
Well, the motion of no confidence, that would mean that the Parliament, at least, you need a 50% plus 1 members. That's the majority of party members, MPs in Parliament, who would vote in support of the motion. That if the motion is successful, that means that the president resigns. but the entire executive resigns as well. Then the president, of course, loses his benefit. But on the other side, when there's an impeachment, the impeachment is only focused on the president, and it's the president that must step aside. I just looked through the Constitution. It doesn't actually say whether the entire executive, it's not explicit whether the entire executive must resign, but it's more explicit on when it comes to the motion of no confidence that the president, the deputy president, and the entire cabinet must step aside.
Now, as it stands, will President Zuma have any recourse if the ruling goes in favor of the applicants?
Well, this is the highest court in the land. There's no appealing this ruling. The governing party, the ANC, will have to find a way of how do they deal with this issue heading forward, considering that it is its deployee that is sitting in the highest office in the land. Of course, there will also have to be the ANC's parliamentary caucus meetings in terms of if there is the impeachment proceedings, how do they vote? And if you remember the last caucus meeting ahead of the secret ballot voting, there was a decision that was taken that they will vote with the ANC in support of President Jacob Zuma. But if you remember, there were at least about, I think, 26 ANC MPs who voted for the removal of the president. And one of those MPs who's now formed their own party is Dr. Makosi.
Essentially, what are the other outcomes that could possibly come from this morning?
Well, the other outcome could be that the court, like they did in the secret vote, ballot judgment, is that the court could say to the applicants that in terms of respecting the rule of law, as well as not overstepping the boundaries and not find the court in being accused of a judicial overreach, what the court will then do is that the court will say the Speaker of Parliament probably might have failed in holding the President accountable. The National Assembly might have failed. However, though, the court cannot instruct the National Assembly on how to deal with issues of oversight when it comes to the conduct of the executive, because the Constitution is already in place on how the President as well as the executive must be held accountable, and the discretionary powers, again, like they did with the secret vote, the discretionary powers vested in the Speaker of Parliament to make the final determination and the final decision whether an ad hoc committee should be established leading up to the impeachment or the impeachment proceedings.
Now, Aldrin, just before we wrap up, from your standpoint view, what do you think are the points, the significant points that can be drawn throughout the course of the morning and that one should be taking away from today, specifically with regards to our constitutional court and justice?
Well, it is this issue around judicial overreach, as I've said, that the court has been very cautious in previous other rulings on how to deal with such issues in terms of holding the executive accountable. How will the court instruct the applicants or the parties in this matter to deal with this issue heading forward? And I was listening back to the judgments, and one of the justices was actually making the argument that it would seem that the Speaker of Parliament has already failed in her duties in terms of oversight and holding the president accountable. That has been already established. And of course, the concession as well from the EFF at least, and this was something that Justice Mogoeng also raised. He said that if you look into, let's say, for instance, the president delivers the State of the Nation address, the president pulls, there's an argument, someone says the president must not address the country, he cannot deliver the State of the Nation address, the president pulls out a firearm, he shoots and 12 people are dead. Would there be a need for an inquiry? And the concession from the Speaker of Parliament's representative was that there would not be a need for an inquiry, however, that there must be a debate and determine whether the president should be removed from the highest office. So those are interesting conundrums that we need to look into. Even if the president is found guilty of corruption, what happens in that case? Will Parliament still have to conduct its oversight in terms of removing the president via motion of no confidence or impeachment? What happens in such cases?
Definitely. Thank you very much for taking us through that and unpacking it further. That was SABC's Aldrin Sampe coming to us live from the Johannesburg Constitutional Court. We will be crossing live as soon as proceedings are underway this morning. Well, the memorial service for South African music legend Robbie Malinga will be held today at the Grace Bible Church in Soweto. He died on Christmas Day at the age of 49 after a battle with pancreatic cancer. Malinga was responsible for shaping the careers of artists like Brown Dash, Kabelo, Arthur Mafukate, as well as Mzeke Zeke. He will be buried on Tuesday. Well, the city of Cape Town will implement level 6 water restrictions from New Year's Day on Monday as the city edges towards day 0. Under the new restrictions, families using more than 10,500 litres a month could see water management devices fitted at their homes. Households with more than 4 people living permanently on the property can apply to the city of Cape Town to have the quota increased. Authorities say that while many Cape Townians are saving water, some 200,000 households are exceeding the daily limit of 87 litres per person. In financial news, the Automobile Association says it is expecting a hefty drop in fuel prices come next month due to the rand's strong performance against the US dollar since mid-December. The association says petrol can be expected to decrease by up to 34 cents a litre, diesel by 26 cents and illuminating paraffin by 28 cents in January. It says that this is despite higher international oil prices this month. The AA says the rand gained considerable traction after the election of Cyril Ramaphosa as the new ANC president. Well, the case of alleged underworld gangsters who hijacked control of security at Cape Town's nightclubs have been postponed yet again. The men will now spend New Year's behind bars as their bail application could not be concluded. Nafiz Maddock, Ashley Fields, Colin Boyson, Carl Kay will be back in the Cape Town Magistrates Court on Tuesday.
The charges against these 5 men stem from this restaurant that is at the V&A waterfront. They are accused of trying to strong-arm the management of this establishment to provide security services without prior approval, as well as demanded management consultancy fees for an opening summer party held here last month. They now face extortion charges to the tune of 90,000 rand. This court has heard about the men's modus operandi. They are Nafiz Maddock, Ashley Fields, Colin Boyson and Carla Kay, and how they travel with 14 bodyguards when they make their demands, and how they demanded to be paid management fees for the restaurant's opening summer party held in early November on the same day of the event. The event was being organized by a third party, and the establishment was forced to fork out 90,000 rand for no work done other than their ordinary security work. The accused continue to appear under heavy police presence. It has also emerged that one of the accused, Nafiz Maddock, tried through a lawyer to get the charges dropped, and there were also similar threats to the manager of the restaurant to get him to drop the charges. The investigating officer in the case, Charles Kinnear, has testified that there have been conflicts and shootings in the security sector of nightclubs since 2015. The case is back in court on Tuesday. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Cape Town.
A former star footballer, George Weah, has been named the winner of Liberia's presidential election, sparking off wild celebrations across the West African country. The final results will only be released today, but the National Election Commission has declared Weah as the winner with 61% of the vote, compared with the 38% for his rival, Vice President Joseph Boakai. The election result paves the way for the first democratic transfer of power in Liberia for over 70 years. Weah will replace Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who has been at the helm of Africa's oldest republic since 2006. The international community has congratulated the candidates and the people of Liberia for a peaceful election, saying it genuinely respected constitutional rules. In our social media for the day, our picture today comes from Sher Kamhunga. Meet South African Enoch Sontonga, who at the age of 24 wrote a prayer in Nkosi Sikelel' Africa that became a national anthem, sung in South Africa and customized in countries like Zimbabwe as well as Zambia. His anthem has been judged as the best in the world by The Economist magazine. Enoch Sontonga passed away on the 18th of April 1905, and this is quite befitting as The Economist has voted South Africa's national anthem as the best in the world this year. Well, having a look at the comment of the day, this one comes in from Professor N.P. Mabaso. I'm proudly South African because Isikelele South African national anthem is voted the best national anthem in the world. All praises and acknowledgements to Enoch Sontonga. He put South Africa on the world's map. Legends live forever. Apart from all, South Africa is blessed. Indeed, it is blessed, and it's so nice to be so patriotic as we approach the end of 2017. Let's move on now and have a look at some of our news making headlines in courts today. We'll start off in Gauteng province this morning. Well, 3 men will appear at the Alberton Magistrates Court today on charges of possession of unlicensed firearms and possession of hijacked vehicles. The 3 suspects were arrested yesterday after an undercover sting operation revealed that they were behind a separate spate of armed robberies. All the suspects from Tembisa will also be investigated for other crimes. Having a look now in the Northern Cape, well, the wife of slain South African artist Walter Meyer will appear in the Uppington Magistrates Court for a formal bail application today. 29-year-old Sophia Meyer was arrested last week after her 52-year-old husband was stabbed to death, allegedly following a quarrel. We will be keeping you updated on both of these cases. For now, though, let's take a short break here on Newsroom. Do stay tuned.
Ho, ho, ho. I know the festive period is upon us, and I just want to say thank you very much indeed for supporting the SABC and particularly our news program throughout the year. And I wish you all a very happy and safe festive period, and don't drink and drive. See you next year.
Welcome back. Well, 2017 will no doubt be a year to remember on the political front, particularly in KZN. It will go down as one of the toughest years for the ruling party, the ANC, as its journey to its recent elective conference had many an obstacle. But for its political opponents, the ANC woes provided opportunity to capitalize. Ayanda Mhlongo takes a look back at the year that was.
It will be difficult to recap on the 2017 year for political parties in Kwazulu-Natal without going back to the previous year, the outcomes of the 2016 local government elections and the events that followed for opposition parties like the DA and the IFP that gained lost ground. But of course, the focus of this year was on the ANC and how things played out for the party. And once again, one needs to go back to November 2015 to the party's provincial elective conference, where the current embattled leadership was elected. The results of this conference continued to haunt the ANC. Divisions that emanated from here only grew, and relations between comrades appeared to be irreparable. leading to what would become a landmark court case. It resulted in the outcomes of the 2015 elective conference being nullified. Amid a pending appeal, the future of the province's leadership remains uncertain. The ANC's national conference in December and its preparations didn't help either. Allegations of gatekeeping and manipulation were rife. And supporters were divided along factional lines as the succession battle intensified. Two presidential contenders came from KZN, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma and former Treasurer General Dr. Zweli Mkhize. As the party battled internal squabbling, it faced a bigger threat: the killing of political leaders. More than 20 have been murdered since 2016. The Moirana Commission was established to investigate the killings. Politicians and community activists among those who've testified. As ANC members, including its alliance partners, were at loggerheads, opposition parties stepped up their game. The IFP regained its strongholds in by-elections, its biggest success winning the Ngutu municipality and probably the most hotly contested by-election to date. Then came the surprise news. Party President Inkosi Mangosuthu Buthelezi announced his intention to step down after 42 years at the helm.
Well, I would no longer be at the helm or be as active as I have been in the last more than 40 years.
He named his preferred successor. While the IFP's biggest rival, the NFP, struggled to survive. The year also saw the country's third largest opposition party celebrating its 4th birthday in Durban, as the freedom fighters are trying to gain a foothold in the province. 2017 was certainly an eventful year, and as we look ahead, all eyes will be on the new ANC leadership to whether it can deal with the party's challenges in KZN. Whether the IFP keeps the momentum after Inkosi Buthelezi steps down, and whether parties like the NFP will be able to get their house in order. 2018 will no doubt be yet another rousing year in the political arena in KZN. Anthem, SABC News, Durban.
Now let's take a look at the front pages from across the globe. We'll start off in the United Kingdom. Well, The Guardian reports that Facebook and Twitter have been threatened with sanctions if they refuse to help a parliamentary investigation into Russian interference in the EU referendum. Moving closer to home, the Namibian says 4 out of 6 directors of NamPower have connections to the Namibia Financial Institutions Supervisory Authority, where businessman Boni Polino, who wants to partner the power utility in the $5 billion Namibian power station, is a deputy chief executive. Finally, in Australia, The Australian reports that Australia's Gina Rinehart has cemented her spot in the world's top 100 richest people as billionaires ramp up their wealth. Well, indeed, we have been asking you to send us your comments on at SABC Newsroom in our national anthem being voted as #1 best in the world by The Economist. We have been taking your comments throughout the course of the morning. Let's have a look at some of the other tweets that have been taking place. Well, we'll be giving those to you in just a bit. The first one, I'm just happy that the world can recognize our national anthem. At least we have something to smile about. #Nkosisikaleli. This one coming in from Mandla. I'm very proud of my country. Thumbs up, Mzansi. Definitely, it's definitely a great achievement. Another one coming in here from Kagiso. It's one of those good news that we hardly ever hear and celebrate at African Democratic Change. We believe South Africa works when South Africans unite. Our national anthem is a good example of that, since it has different languages, except it doesn't have a Chivenda. Last one coming in here from Dyson. Well, it has just proven itself, the anthem, that South Africa is ready to compete globally with the very best countries. My wish is to see South Africa being marked #1 globally when it comes to poverty reduction among my fellow youths. Well, those are good comments coming in. Keep them coming through. For now, though, let's take a short break.
Sounds like call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land.
Today on Rights and Recourse, we will unpack the new Provisional Court Bill.
The idea of the bill is not to overregulate, to basically set the principles.
The most important aspect of this bill is that it understands that customary law by its nature is consensual, that I have a right to affiliate, I have a right therefore to opt in, and I have a right to opt out.
The opt-out provision is basically one that you've got to respect the court in the sense of if you've been summoned, you've got to tell the clerk of the court at least that you're not willing to attend.
The challenge that I would like to throw to the Department of Justice, it has to come up with mechanisms of ensuring that people who exercise their right to opt out or to opt in are not in any way victimized.
Hashtag Rights with Dumila Matez on legal issues every Sunday at 2 o'clock Central African Time.
Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Greetings from the sports desk. My name is Marumo Kekana. Let's update your sports news. Australia made a never start, losing 2 wickets as they reduced England's lead to 94 runs on the 4th day of the 4th Ashes Test in Melbourne this morning. The tourists, with all the momentum after Alistair Cook's record-breaking innings of 244 not out, snared the wickets of Cameron Bancroft and Usman Khawaja to send the jitters through the home side. At lunch, the Australians were on 70 for 2 with David Warner and Steve Smith at their crease. Here's a look back at some of the earlier highlights.
Oh, well placed. Boy, that's a good shot. That's why the selectors went for
spin bowling.
Got him! First blood. Chris Wokes is the man who has drawn it.
He sort of followed it a little bit, sort of squared him up, and he just pushed at it. So hard with that angle in. Yeah.
Just like that. Just waits for that ball, stands up, didn't quite get hold of it. More as the rain starts to fall. But he understands the value of getting off, getting the covers on, keeping that pitch dry as it can be.
Now let's turn our attention to some football news. Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger equaled Manchester United Alex Ferguson's Premier League record of 810 matches in charge when his side beat Crystal Palace by 3-2. Arsenal drew level with a 4th-placed North London rivals Tottenham Hotspur, but with a worse goal difference. Wenger's side forced the breakthrough in the 24th minute when Palace's failure to clear Mesut Ozil free kick eventually led to Shokran Mustafi's opening goal. Wilfred Zaha was dangerous throughout and provided the assist to Andros Townsend to score the equalizer in the second half. A brace in 4 minutes for Alexis Sanchez, whose contract expires at the end of the season, killed the Palace's resolve. James Tompkins' header with a minute to go was late for any comeback materialized for the host. Discovery Walter Sisulu Soccer Challenge is in its 15th year and it keeps growing every year. Security measures have been put in place for the safety of players and fans alike. This year's tournament started on the 1st of December and the final match will be staged today.
The tournament is drawing huge crowds every year, and it caters for men and women in the under-17 category as well as senior level. The likes of Bidvest Vets captain Thulani Hlachwayo and the Dutch-based Thulani Serero are some of products of the tournament. They used to play for Sinawana Gunners, who beat Strokes FC 4-2 on penalties in the quarterfinals on Wednesday.
It's been hectic, to be honest, but I think it's good for football, for the supporters, you can see, for the players, referees, administrators, and the coaches. Obviously, it's good to see young guys, coaches, getting stressed at this level, you understand? And it's good football, and it tells us that there's something that we're doing right at this time of the season.
The organizers are hopeful that the tournament will keep on unearthing young talent who will go on and achieve bigger and better things. The final matches across all categories will be played on Friday when the curtain comes down on this year's tournament. Mtutuzi Ndlovu, SABC News, Soweto.
Cristiano Ronaldo was named the best player of the year, while Zinedine Zidane was voted the best coach of the year as Real Madrid dominated the Globe Soccer Awards in Dubai. The Spanish side were also named the best team of the year. The 5 times Ballon d'Or winner won a La Liga and Champions League double with the Matric club this year, striking twice against the Juventus in the European Cup final to help Real become the first team to retain the trophy in its current format. The Real Madrid and Portugal striker was presented with the trophy by former Juventus and Italy international Alessandro Del Piero in a studio in Madrid. Real Madrid French coach Zinedine Zidane won the best coach of the year for his part in the club's success. Zidane took charge in Real Madrid in January 2016 and has led them to consecutive Champions League trophies and their first La Liga title since 2012, as well as winning the UEFA Super Cup twice and the FIFA Club World Cup. FIFA President Gianni Infantino said that the decision to expand the World Cup to 48 teams from its current 32 was taken to boost the development of the game. Speaking at the closing of the Dubai International Sports Conference, Infantino said the charges which comes into effect in the 2026 tournament will give more developing nations the chance to participate at the highest level. Infantino also said that the game's governing body were looking possible changes to the Club World Cup, which currently held every December, which may include moving the tournament to a different time of the year.
We have to see what we can do there in order to make sure that we create a serious club football World Cup, in order to make sure that confederations and club football and leagues all over the world are developed at the same speed as it is happening in Europe. So we have some ideas and some plans about moving the Club World Cup to a different stage, to another stage, to a world stage, because FIFA, what its ambition and its task is to organize world-class competitions for the benefit of football all over the world.
Australian Super Maxi LTV Comanche was awarded line honours for the Sydney to Hobart Blue Water Classic after an international jury imposed a 1-hour penalty on Wild Oats 11. Wild Oats smashed the race record when it crossed the line, with the Comanche finishing just over 26 minutes later, but they had protested about a near collision between the two Super Maxis when Wild Oats completed a tag about 15 minutes after the start in Sydney Harbour.
I honestly didn't expect to protest in order to win the race. It was all about our actions in order to avoid a collision, and the fact that that was necessary. So, well, I feel quite strongly that the rules are there to protect people's lives, and if we can't rely on that, then it's a difficulty in the sport.
Obviously, I mean, everyone's a genius in hindsight. You know, it's just one of those things. We spoke about it, and you know, in the heat of the battle and at the time, you sort of think it's a little bit different than what it obviously was. You look at the footage afterwards and you sort of go, maybe that was a bit too close there, guys. So it's just, that's the decision you make, you know, and you've got to live by your decisions, and we made that decision, and here we are today.
Kevin Anderson got off to a winning start at the 10th edition of the Mubadala World Tennis Championship with a straight sets victory over Spaniard's Pablo Carreno Busta. Ranked 14th in the world, big-hitting South African Anderson beat world number 10 Busta by 6-3, 7-6 in the first match of the 6-month exhibition event. The other match of the day saw Spaniard's Roberto Batista Augusta beat young Russian Andy Rublev by 7-5, 6-2. And that's how we wrap up your sports bulletin at this hour. Up next, Ndawo Yandona Azitaka Zituan is standing by with your weather update.
Much thanks to Marumo and warm welcome. Let's take a look at your weather details on our satellite image. We're still seeing lots of moisture situated over the central interior and some of it finding its way over the interior of South Africa, where we're expecting partly cloudy skies for today with isolated thunder showers to scattered as you go towards the interior of KwaZulu-Natal and some parts of Mpumalanga for today. Otherwise, clear skies over the southern parts and along the coastal regions. 30% chance of showers forecast for today. Over the interior, up to 80% chance of thunder showers in Zambia associated with severe thunderstorms going to the interior of DRC, southern parts of Madagascar and along the coastal regions as well. So if you will be in those regions, please do have your umbrella with and do take note of that build up and keep yourself safe. A band of showers expected through from Namibia going to Botswana and entering South Africa, bringing up to 60% chance of thunder showers for tomorrow in Gauteng, going to Mpumalanga, KwaZulu-Natal, some parts of Northwest and Free State, but the southern parts will remain clear and partly cloudy again along the coastal regions with 30% chance of showers, 30% chance of showers along the coast of Madagascar, going to the northern parts. Over the interior, up to 60% chance of thunder showers forecast for tomorrow. 36 is your maximum in Bloemfontein and 34 in Pretoria. Polokwane at 29. Isolated thunder showers expected over the northern parts going along the coastal regions in KwaZulu-Natal, but moving to the interior, just partly cloudy and clear skies to mostly sunny skies over the Western Cape. Cape Town at a maximum of 31 and Sutherland, Springbok as well. Uppington will be very hot at a maximum of 39 with a warning of high fire danger for today. So please do take note of that and do not start any unnecessary fires. Bait Bridge at 37 degrees and 29 in Harare, Maputo at a maximum of 29. Isolated showers in Botswana, Gaborone at 39. Serowe will be clear at 36. Windhoek sitting at a maximum of 34. Going to Madagascar, isolated over the interior, up to 80% chance of thunder showers along the north coastal regions going to the interior as well. Antananarivo will sit at a maximum of 25. Over the eastern parts, still expecting partly cloudy skies over most parts. Dar es Salaam at 31. Kilimanjaro at 34, Kigali at 28. If you will be in Lusaka, a maximum of 29 is forecast for today. Over the eastern sides, drizzle is expected over Point Inui in the western and Libreville at 28. Bangui very hot at a maximum of 38 degrees. Over the northern parts, still seeing clear skies over the Sahara, isolated along the coastal regions. And tomorrow, we're still expecting similar conditions along the coastal regions and clear over the Sahara. Your temperatures are expected to be cold along the coastal regions, but Massawa will sit at a maximum of 34, 38 for Juba. Addis Ababa sitting at 23 and clear skies forecast for today. We're expecting a maximum of 22 in Damascus. Going to Cairo, a maximum of 22 and partly cloudy skies. Cold temperatures in Tunis at 14 and 16 for Benghazi. If you will be in Las Palmas, a maximum of 18 is forecast with partly cloudy skies. That's all. Ndawo Yandona.
There is immense public interest in this morning's Constitutional Court judgment in the so-called Zuma impeachment case. The EFF and other parties brought the case in a bid to seek impeachment proceedings against President Jacob Zuma related to upgrades to his private home in Nkandla. Well, judgment is expected to be delivered at 10 a.m. this morning. For now, though, we are joined in studio by Nwando Qaso, who is a constitutional lawyer and analyst. Nwando will be staying with us throughout the show this morning. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Essentially, what are we going to be expecting regarding the president's impeachment this morning?
Well, as you know, this case has quite a long history. Well, longest history from 2014 when the public protector issued her report regarding the Nkandla issue and the remedial action that she had ordered in that report, and an expectation that the National Assembly and the Speaker would take action. So you may recall that last year there was also a big Constitutional Court judgment, and this is a follow-on from that judgment. And that judgment was actually very important. It was a setup for this current judgment that we're about to hear now. And basically what it said is that the president had failed to uphold, defend, and the Constitution, and that the National Assembly is actually obligated to hold the president accountable. So now, this particular judgment, the parties have come back to the court again, saying that the Speaker did not have in place the appropriate measures to hold the president accountable. And they're also saying that by not doing so, she's violated the Constitution, I think Section 42, 48, and 55 of the Constitution. And what they want is for the Speaker to convene either a parliamentary committee or an independent body to look at the president's conduct and whether he's guilty of an offense, and that will require the National Assembly in terms of Section 89 to exercise its powers to remove the president. Ultimately, that's what we're looking at. It's to force the National Assembly to take action following this court's judgment from last year, saying that he violated the Constitution.
In your view, which way do you think the favor is going to sway?
I actually have no idea. I think what I would like is for the court to order for the convening of this independent body, but I don't know where that takes us. So the independent body is going to do its investigation. They're going to say, for instance, that he's guilty of an offense. You can't force an impeachment. If you don't have the numbers, you don't have the numbers. So I'm a constitutional lawyer, so I like sort of stretching the boundaries of the Constitution. I enjoy cases like this from an academic perspective, but in terms of a tangible sort of difference, I'm not sure if this is the way to go. I think the way you do this is either the ANC does something, or we have elections in 2019.
If Jacob Zuma does lose this case, what are the other repercussions for other cases against him? So
there's no order sought against him in this case. It's merely focused on the Speaker and the National Assembly. I would say the nub of it is to force the National Assembly to actually take action following what the Constitutional Court said last year in its judgment, saying that they are obligated in terms of the Constitution to hold him accountable. And that hasn't happened because he's president, but the Speaker actually opposes this application, saying that there have been a number of votes of no confidence and they haven't been successful. There have been Q&As in Parliament regarding the president's conduct. She just points to certain processes that have happened to prove that Parliament has actually done something about this issue.
Yeah. With that being said, then, do you think that she would possibly be making a ruling on the president's violation of the Constitution?
The Speaker?
Yes.
I think if the judgment says that she has to convene this independent body or a parliamentary committee, then that's what she has to do.
What are the other expectations that could possibly come out from this morning that we wouldn't necessarily have looked out for?
Maybe the court will say, look, we've exhausted this matter, there's nothing we can do. I mean, if you remember last year's judgment was very groundbreaking, saying that the president failed to uphold the Constitution. That's a serious charge, and a lot of people expected the court to take it a step further and actually order impeachment. Because of the separation of powers, the court can't do that. They went close as they can, but they cannot actually take it that far. And they said explicitly in that case that is the function of Parliament. How the president is removed is provided for in the Constitution, and it's only in the hands of the National Assembly. And if that hasn't happened, I don't think the court can force that to happen.
And what is this going to say about our judiciary?
Depending how it goes, if the parties win, it could be that a lot of people will think that we have quite an active judiciary. But what I know of the Constitutional Court is that every judgment is well reasoned, and I'm looking forward to hearing those reasons. And I think it's healthy for our democracy. I guess we'll find out in a couple of minutes what people are going to be saying.
And we did mention that the ruling could go either way. If the finding is against him, could he possibly be released of his current presidential duties?
Not as a consequence of this case. I think there's a couple of steps before we get to the removal of anyone. There has to be this independent body or parliamentary committee and then they have to report to the National Assembly if he's guilty of an offense. And then there's a Section 89 process, which is in the hands of Parliament. They'll have to vote, like we've seen a number of times before. I mean, there's been the state capture issue, there's been this Nkandla issue, there's been a number of votes in Parliament trying to remove the president. So there's still a number of steps before then.
And I posed this question to our reporter earlier, but from your side as an analyst, and for someone watching at home, how would you describe the main different viewpoints or the standpoints in between impeachment and motion of no confidence?
So it's different number of votes that are required. So impeachment has a higher threshold, and also the word impeachment doesn't even appear on our constitution. It requires more votes than a motion of no confidence. So you'll find that we have had more votes of no confidence than impeachment, because no confidence requires about 51% of the votes, whereas impeachment is quite higher than that. I think for any president, I think both are quite serious charges to face, no confidence or impeachment. But impeachment, it's almost unanimous that the National Assembly, thinks you should go.
Thank you very much for joining us in studio. I'm going to ask you not to move an inch. Kaso, who is the constitutional lawyer and analyst, will be staying with us as we await the verdict come at 10 o'clock. We'll also be joined by Lawson Naidu from Cape Town for more on the story. For now, though, do stay tuned to Newsroom. Let's take a short break.
For your weekly dose of art and entertainment news, tune into Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1.
We're shooting a campaign. We're telling genuine stories from real people that have been affected by the SABC. It's also interesting to get the backstory in terms of their dreams to be on screen and eventually getting the pleasure to do that. And understanding that they're communicating on a platform that speaks to millions of people. It speaks to how the SABC can fulfill its mandate.
The SABC represents the opportunity for so many young South Africans, for old South Africans, to be able to look at the world that they may not experience any other way.
People should continue to pay their TV license because it allows the SABC to bring quality programming.
The TV license is really part of the lifeblood of the channel and the corporation.
When you're listening to your favorite jams, you're listening to your favorite radio DJ, you must know that you made it possible by paying your TV license.
It's such a holistic process that goes into TV licenses. It's not only one part where we say South Africans have to pay for TV licenses. You pay a TV license because you get so much value out of it, and that's the content that you get every single day on the SABC platforms.
I have been in the film industry now for 51 years. I am quite satisfied with the evolution of television now, that you have got a lot of actors and you have got a lot of crew members, which will also play part of paying our licenses, because I think it's proper.
weekly dose of art and entertainment news, tune into Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1.
And there you have it, voted best anthem in the world, national anthem. Some good news to wake up on a Friday morning, Maroma.
No, of course. I mean, it feels good to be South African. We're pleased to have our national anthem being recognized around the world. And to come out tops, I mean, you look at the likes of Brazilians when they sing their national anthem. We were talking about it earlier on. But we managed to top them too. Russia came second, so which means Uruguay third. So which means, look, internationally now they know who Mzansi is.
And Russia coming in second as well.
Oh, you see?
They're also very patriotic, the Russians. Let's have a look at some of your tweets that have been coming in this morning with regards to your comments on at SABC Newsroom on how you feel about our national anthem being placed #1 by The Economist this morning.
Mojalefa Mpanya says, we are proud to hear that. However, we don't practice what is written in the lyrics. Doesn't make any impact on me. Angry society.
He's
Well,
not a happy
those are other
camper
issues
this
that
morning.
Mujalefa is raising on such a day. But hey, yeah.
Not on a Friday, not on a Friday. Well, you are live in any stadium where the books are playing. The passion from fans, the vibe, the singing, and above all, the unity of the South African people. You will swear that it really deserves that honor. It definitely does.
Oh, yes. No, couldn't agree more. Tabo Quincy Peter saying, that's the good news. I hope one day they will add other South African languages in the song so that all South Africans can be proud. Tonga and Venda, etc. Remember this issue came out.
Many vendors are very unhappy that they are not included in the South African national anthem. Another one coming in here again. As long as there is no Tonga in it, I am not happy.
Probably then, well, I don't know, as a country we'll have to have an engagement on whether and how to, you know, make everyone be part of that national anthem, because at the end of the day, it represents who you are as a citizen of this country.
It definitely does. A very good morning to you. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm Shante Yankee.
Warm greetings from the sports desk. My name is Maruma Kekana.
First up, let's have a look at your morning headlines. Well, the Constitutional Court is expected to rule today on whether Parliament should start impeachment proceedings against President Jacob Zuma. In financial news, the Automobile Association says petrol can be expected to decrease by up to 34 cents a litre, diesel by 26 cents and illuminating paraffin by 28 cents in January. Unofficial reports have named former star footballer George Weah as the winner of Liberia's presidential election. Official results will only be released later today. And standing by with your sports is Marumo Kekana.
Yeah, no, like we've been saying, you remember we witnessed the first day-night test cricket between South Africa.
Days.
It was just in 2 days. One of our viewers predicted that it was only going to last for 2 days. But your impression, more or less, going forward, do you think that it's something that as a country we should keep on experiencing, and even for the lovers of the sport to go to the stadiums and experience such vibes? Because in most cases, we only experience that in ODIs and T20s.
Oh, no, definitely. And I think that South Africans have been very patriotic, specifically now over the festive season. So when they can go, they do go, and they do support our boys.
Of course, and more especially when the boys are doing good. What you can also look forward to is the fact that Australia might never start, losing 2 wickets as they reduced England's lead to 94 runs on the fourth day of the fourth Ashes test in Melbourne this morning. The tourists, with all the momentum after Alistair Cook's record-breaking innings of 244 not out, snared wickets of Cameron Bancroft and Usman Khawaja to send the jitters through the home side. At lunch, the Australians were 70-2 with David Warner and Steve Smith at the crease. In football news, Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger equaled Manchester United legend Sir Alex Ferguson's Premier League record of 810 matches in charge when his side beat Crystal Palace by 3-2. A brace in 4 minutes from Alexis Sanchez, whose contract expires at the end of the season, killed Palace's resolve. James Tompkins' header with a minute to go was late for any comeback for the materialize for the host. This and more later. We now hand you over to the main desk where Shantae Yankees is standing by with the latest.
Thank you, Marumo. Well, the Constitutional Court is delivering judgment in the so-called Zuma impeachment case. Let's cross live.
While much remedial work has been done since the advent of constitutional democracy, sadly, deep social disparities and resultant social inequity are still with us. In an unconcealed design, the Constitution ardently demands that this social unevenness be addressed by a radical transformation of society as a whole and of public education in particular, close quote. These truths and the demand for radical transformation apply with equal force to those of our universities where Afrikaans was the sole medium of instruction. They were exceedingly well-resourced for the exclusive or primary benefit of white Afrikaner students, and their inseparable and almost destiny-defining mandate was to develop the Afrikaans language very well. As a result, it now effortlessly and admirably fits President Mandela's poetic description of it as a language of scholarship and science. Sadly, all African universities and languages were deliberately starved of resources and capacities critical for a similar developmental agenda. Issues around language policy are as emotive as the language itself. This would be especially so where plans are afoot to effect changes that would water down the role or usage of language, particularly Afrikaans. For Afrikaans has for many years been associated with dominion or power. Those whose mother tongue it is once ruled this country. To get to the point where Afrikaans now appears to be driven to virtual extinction as a university medium of instruction was always going to give rise to disaffection, controversy, or a suspicion that a less than innocent agenda was being pursued. Extremely difficult, sensitive, and potentially divisive, as the language issue in general and Afrikaans in particular was and is bound to be for many years to come, the historical role of Afrikaans inescapably has to be confronted whenever possibilities of its use or disuse as a language of instruction are explored. After all, we come from a racially divided past to which Afrikaans was inextricably linked. It bears emphasis that though not necessarily articulated, a suspicion that Afrikaans was being unreasonably singled out for marginalization for ignoble historical reasons is always likely to lurk in the background. The use of Afrikaans is thus one of the most likely areas of fierce disputation. But, as Professor Jakes Hervel and his advisory committee said, and I quote, "That is part of the challenge of healing, reconciliation, and reparation that our society will continue to face for a considerable time to come," close quote. It is a difficult transformational issue that requires a meticulous and detached handling by all true defenders and ambassadors of our constitutional vision. However, we all must consciously guard against the possibility of a subliminal and yet effectively prejudicial disposition towards Afrikaans setting in owing only to its past record as a virtual synonym to, open quotes, racism and racially based practices, close quotes. All of the above said, it falls to be determined whether it was reasonably practicable for the University of the Free State to retain Afrikaans as the second major medium of instruction. The meaning of reasonably practicable factors, factors that ought to inform its determination, and whether the university language policy was developed with due deference to that of the Minister of Education are some of the issues central to the decision of this court. Exercising his powers in terms of Section 3 of the Higher Education Act, the then Minister of Education, Professor Kara Asmal, developed a language policy framework for higher education institutions. That policy begins by recognizing the use of language as a potential instrument of discrimination and oppression, and sets out constitutional provisions and values that ought to inform its proper understanding and application. It then ends by underscoring the need for multilingualism, expressing support for the retention and development of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. This is, however, on condition that the use of Afrikaans does not unjustly deprive others of access to higher education and wittingly or unwittingly become an instrument for the furtherance of racial or narrow cultural discrimination. A report that was commissioned by the university authorities to look into the appropriateness of the continued use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction highlighted its entrenchment of racial division among students and virtual subversion of racial integration. The use of Afrikaans reportedly worked against equal access to knowledge. Racial discrimination and the need for redress are the paramount concerns raised by the university within the context of reasonable practicability. And Afrikaans has itself fallen into relative disuse since many Afrikaner students allegedly prefer English because they, open quotes, see themselves as living, learning, and laboring in a global world where English competence provides more access and mobility than any other South African language, close quote. Observable incidents and daily experience backed up by empirical research evidently caused the university to think and respond differently to Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. As a result, the university management recommended a language policy shift. After open and admittedly extensive consultations with interested parties, including AfriForum, Solidarity, and language experts, the final report was presented to the University Council for approval, and it was adopted. The new language policy is that English will be the only primary medium of instruction. It is intended to be implemented progressively over a period of about 5 years. Afrikaans will, however, still have an important role to play. It is to be used in the expanded tutorial system and as a medium of instruction to cater for, certain professional programs like education and theology, because there is a market demand for them. AfriForum and Solidarity are, however, unhappy with the policy. Some of their objections are that proper research was not conducted and that most white and some black Afrikaans-speaking students prefer to be taught in Afrikaans. In essence, they see no justification for the language policy shift. As a result, they approached the Free State High Court in Bloemfontein to review and set aside the adoption of the policy by council. The full court of the High Court ruled in their favor. Displeased with this outcome, the university successfully appealed to the Supreme Court of Appeal. AfriForum and Solidarity were aggrieved by this outcome. They now seek leave from this court to appeal against the Supreme Court of Appeal decision. On standing, we hold that AfriForum does have standing, but not Solidarity. And leave to appeal is refused on the basis that it is not in the interest of justice to grant it for the reasons that follow below. Much turns on the correct meaning of the words reasonably practicable in Section 29(2) of the Constitution. Every South African has the constitutional right to be taught in a preferred official language in our public institutions of learning. But access to that right is not unqualified. The overarching condition is that the fulfillment of that promise of education in a language of choice must be reasonably practicable. and what reasonable practicability means and entails, and whether the University of the Free State was entitled to adopt the new language policy lie at the heart of this application. It would be unreasonable to slavishly hold on to a language policy that has proved to be the practical antithesis of fairness, feasibility, inclusivity, and the remedial action necessary to shake racism and its tendencies out of their comfort zone. For these reasons, effective access to the right to be instructed in an official language of choice must be given effect to, but without undermining equitable access, preserving exclusivity, or perpetuating racial supremacy. It would be unreasonable to wittingly or inadvertently allow some of our people to have unimpeded access to education and success at the expense of others as a direct consequence of a blind pursuit of the enjoyment of the right to education in a language of choice. This in circumstances where all could properly be educated in one common language. At a conceptual level, dual medium institutions might well exist without necessarily nurturing or perpetuating unfair advantage or racial discrimination and its exceedingly harmful tendencies. When that is so, then the right to be taught in a language of choice could be effectively accessible and implemented. That, by the way, is what the university did or hoped to achieve when it moved from a dispensation of Afrikaans as the sole medium of instruction to one where English and Afrikaans enjoyed equal status as media of instruction. It did so to facilitate equitable access, mostly better acquainted with English, so that they
Well, currently, Justice Mogoeng is handing down the judgment on the language policy that was brought forward by AfriForum as well as Solidarity. And they have been taking us through the main points there. Initially, it was brought forward by UFS with regards to the language policies. And we had also seen many strikes that had taken place on and in around campuses with regards to the issue. Let's go back to the ruling.
Where access, integration, and racial harmony are imperiled by giving effect to the right to be educated in an official language of choice, then the criterion of reasonable practicability would not have been met. Reasonable practicability, therefore, requires not only that practicability test be met, but also that considerations of reasonableness that extend to equity and the need to cure the ills of our shameful apartheid past be appropriately accommodated. And that is achievable only if the exercise of the right to be taught in a language of choice does not pose a threat to racial harmony or inadvertently nurture racial supremacy. That goes to practicability. The question then is, has the use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction at the University of the Free State had a comfortable coexistence with our collective aspirations to heal the divisions of our past, or has it impeded the prospects of our unity in our diversity? Has race relations, particularly among students, improved or degenerated as a consequence of the university's 2003 language policy? If not, would it be reasonably practicable for the university to relegate Afrikaans to low-key utilization in a constitutionally permissible way? A conclusion that is embraced by many Afrikaners at all levels of the university community and in council is that the use of Afrikaans as a parallel language of instruction unwittingly perpetuates segregation and racism, open quotes, because it offends constitutional norms, close quotes. The policy does not work and has lost support because many Afrikaner students prefer English, which they see as a tool of communication that would enhance their prospects of being global players. Furthermore, it is quite telling that within 2 years of the implementation of the dual medium policy, the then rector of the university, Professor Fourie, expressed concern about the unintended consequences of the parallel medium policy giving rise to or entrenching segregation in lecture rooms along racial lines. He would have known whether that segregation was innocuous or toxic in its effect. Naturally, he would not have been concerned if it were not inimical to our shared constitutional vision of building a common sense of nationhood. Consistent with Professor Fori's apparent discomfort, this policy eventually led to racial tension, and concerns were raised by both staff and students about its injurious consequences. Its counterproductive effect featured regularly in progress reports on dual medium policy implementation. Observations, daily experience, consultative processes in which Solidarity and AfriForum participated, and empirical research pointed to the need to progressively phase out Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. A particularly striking observation relates to what is not said about the need to consider all reasonable alternatives. That process would require that equitable access and the need to redress the effects of racism be taken into account in exploring all reasonable alternatives. Both Solidarity and AfriForum were involved in the admittedly transparent, inclusive, and robust consultative process. There is no suggestion that they, any stakeholder or language expert, tabled any constitutionally compliant alternative and that it was ignored. And it is hard to imagine why the university would ignore known or available reasonable alternatives in wanton disregard for its constitutional obligations, particularly when the change it is effecting takes away a pre-existing entitlement. The only reasonable deduction to make from the non-implementation of any alternative that would allow the full retention of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction is that, but for its continued use in education, theology, and tutorials, no other reasonable alternative was available for the university to consider. The university authorities, lecturers, students' intimate connection to or daily experience on campus put them at a vantage point to understand better and speak with respectable authority on the true state of affairs in their own house, in quotes. Whether white Afrikaner students have demonstrated respect for the dignity of fellow students who are black in their daily interactions over the years, and whether a credible or vital connection has been made between racially segregated classes and racial tensions alluded to, the university community would know better. Racial inclusivity and redressing the damage caused by racism and its tendencies are a critical component of the ministerial policy. The implementation of any language policy that undermines these constitutional and policy objectives has to be desisted from. And the university is in effect saying that President Mandela's worst nightmares have come to pass. The use of Afrikaans has unintentionally become a facilitator of ethnic or cultural separation and racial tension. And this has been so from around 2005 to 2016. Its continued use would leave the results of white supremacy not being redressed but kept alive and well. It is for that reason that a policy revision or intervention has since become necessary. The link between racially segregated lectures and racial tension has not been denied. While it may be practicable to retain Afrikaans as a major medium of instruction, it certainly cannot be reasonably practicable when race relations are poisoned thereby. Logic dictates that if there was a known way of addressing racial tension and other concerns relating to the use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, it would not only have been stated by the aggrieved parties, but also implemented. So, the challenge based on the correct meaning of reasonably practicable must fail. This then leaves us with the alternative grounded on the alleged inconsistency between the ministerial policy framework and the university policy. The university's impugned language policy is challenged on the basis that it flouts the essence of the ministerial policy and was therefore not developed subject to it. In particular, it is contended that the university's policy has strayed from the ministerial policy framework by phasing out Afrikaans as one of the two dominant languages of instruction when it should be retaining and not eroding it. That, by the way, is essentially the basis on which the High Court ruled in favor of AfriForum and Solidarity. Their full support for the retention of Afrikaans as a medium of academic expression and communication in higher education was no doubt informed by what was known and hoped for when the ministerial policy framework was developed and published. And so was the commitment to ensure that the capacity of Afrikaans to function as a medium is not eroded. That position was thus inspired by the context of that time. Would these policy provisions prevent an institution of higher learning from revising its policy and prescribing English as the only medium of instruction even when no student wanted to be taught in Afrikaans? What if racial polarization or tension has for years proved to be a direct consequence of using Afrikaans as the second medium of instruction and all reasonable endeavors to address it have failed? What if there were widely televised incidents of crass racism at the University of the Free State perpetrated by white Afrikaner students against black students or black staff members that drove a chill down the spines of well-meaning South Africans of all races? Would the university still be constrained by the ministerial policy framework from acting in line with changed circumstances and the Constitution? The ministerial policy framework highlights the need to ensure that a language of instruction is not a barrier to access and success. And there has already been a concern raised about access. One crucial aspect of the ministerial policy is the constitutional proviso, open quotes, that these rights may not be exercised inconsistently with any provision of the Bill of Rights, close quotes. The other inbuilt constitutional qualifiers are the Section 29(2) criteria, like reasonably practicable, as well as equity, practicability, and the need to redress the results of the past racially discriminatory laws and practices. Here, the university community, council, and senate in particular have satisfied themselves that instead of the dual language policy brightening up the prospects of redressing the damage caused by apartheid, it threatens to perpetuate racial discrimination or disharmony. The retention of the dual medium of instruction was neither considered to be fair nor feasible, nor to satisfy the need to remedy the results of apartheid laws and practices. So, the university was at risk of violating poignant constitutional provisions and the ministerial language policy properly understood. Nobody is to blame for the outturn of racially segregated lectures. It is the old policy itself that yielded deleterious and certainly unintended consequences. The good sought to be achieved through a parallel medium of instruction has backfired. The retention of that policy is therefore no longer reasonably practicable since it does not help students, open quotes, to build a common sense of nationhood consistent, close quotes, with the ministerial policy framework in its entirety. The university's new language policy responds to the materialized warning sounded by the ministerial policy framework itself that unintended consequences could flow from a well-intentioned attempt to be as inclusive and sensitive in relation to language as institutions of learning should always strive to be. Unjust denial of access and racial and narrow-cultural segregation has become the consequence of seeking to have Afrikaans-speaking students enjoy their own constitutional rights to be taught in their official language of choice. Afrikaans as a medium of instruction has unwittingly become an instrument of racial or cultural division and discrimination. The university's language policy was determined subject to and is thus consistent with the ministerial policy framework and the Constitution of the Republic. Its adoption is lawful and valid. In a dissenting judgment, Froneman J. Cameron J. and Pretorius A.J. concurring took the view that the Constitutional Court ought to have set this matter down for hearing. He considered that such an approach would have enhanced the legitimacy of the outcome and better reflected the court's practice. He also would have granted leave to appeal on the basis that the applicant's case bore prospects of success and in any event concerns unfinished business under the Constitution. Froneman J. stressed the broader context in which this matter arose and pointed out that the Constitutional Court has never held that the mere exercise of a constitutionally protected language right can amount to unfair racial discrimination that would necessarily justify taking away that right. He noted that the parties do not accept the Supreme Court of Appeals' interpretation of Section 29(2) of the Constitution. He drew attention to unclear factual issues and regretted that these had not been fully ventilated. He also regretted that other institutions and organizations had not been given an opportunity to make submissions. Froneman J. closed his judgment by noting that, on the papers as they stood, he would have reserved costs and referred this matter back to the High Court so that additional evidence could be taken. He expressed his hope that the outcome of this matter will not undermine the development of languages other than African.
Well, Justice Mogoeng is currently handing down judgment, with regards to the Constitutional Court case that had been brought before the court with regards to the UFS language policy. It had been brought forward from AfriForum as well as Solidarity, making mentions with regards to the racial tensions that had been taking place on UFS, as well as the inconsistencies between the ministerial as well as university policies that had taken place, specifically with regards to the language barrier, also making reference there that any ministerial policies then say that no language should be a barrier for anyone in terms of education, and contradictorily taking those through the university. So let's have a look at the judgment that has been handed down.
I call the matter of economic freedom fighters and others, and Speaker of the National Assembly and another for judgment.
May it please the Court, Chief Justice, Justices, and the Justices. I'm Sudisa Gaba, counsel for appearing on behalf of the first, second, and the third applicants, to know the judgment in their application before this Honorable Court.
Thank you, ma'am.
May it please the Court, Chief Justice, Justices, I'm Lerato Zikalala. I appear on behalf of the Democratic Alliance, the second applicant in this matter.
Thank you.
May it please the Court, Chief Justice, Justices, Rihanna Talk, and together with my learned leader, Ms. Pillay, we appeared for the Amicus Curiae Corruption Watch in this matter.
Thank you.
As the Court pleases, Chief Justice and Justice of the Court, I'm Vijay Dulam, appearing on behalf of the first respondent.
Thank you very much.
Before I read the customary summary in this matter, I need to mention that there were 4 judgments prepared, 2 judgments reaching a particular outcome, and the other 2 a different one. We do have a majority judgment which constitutes the judgment of the court. The summary I'm about to read is limited to the main findings and conclusions reached in each judgment. This application is the sequel to Economic Freedom Fighters v. Speaker of the National Assembly, a judgment of this court which was delivered on 31 March 2016. In that matter, this court held that the President had failed to uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution. This failure was manifested, the court concluded, from the disregard for the remedial action taken against him by the public protector. In the same judgment, and with regard to the National Assembly, the court held, open quote, on a proper construction of its constitutional obligations, the National Assembly was duty-bound to hold the President accountable by facilitating and ensuring compliance with the decision of the public protector, close quote. A resolution passed by the National Assembly and which exonerated the President from liability was declared inconsistent with the Constitution and was set aside. This was in addition to other orders issued by the court which are not relevant for present purposes. On 30 March 2017, the Economic Freedom Fighters, the United Democratic Movement, and the Congress of the People instituted the current application in this court. They sought direct access on the ground that the issues raised fall within the exclusive jurisdiction of this court. On the merits, they sought an order declaring that the Assembly has failed to fulfill 2 obligations arising from Section 89 of the Constitution. They contended that the section obliged the Assembly to adopt rules that govern the removal of a president from office. They argued that since the current rules do not regulate such process, the Assembly has failed to discharge this obligation. Furthermore, they contended that the Assembly has failed to hold the President to account following the findings of the Public Protector and this court in its judgment. They argued that the President has committed a serious violation of the Constitution and the law. In addition, they contended that he has also committed a misconduct contemplated in Section 89, sub 1 of the Constitution. The application
Well, Judge Jafta now is moving on with regards to that motion with regards to the impeachment of President Jacob Zuma. The proceedings are expected, or actually they have started, they are underway. That was just on the backdrop, of course, also of Justice Mogoeng handing down the judgment of the language policy, ruling in favor of UFS to have English as the only medium of instruction to be instructed at the University of the Free State there. Well, we have been giving you all the live updates coming from the Constitutional Court. With regards to that, let's cross live.
And other motions whose purpose was to remove the President from office. They pointed out that all these motions failed because they lacked the necessary support from the majority within members of the Assembly. Closer to the hearing of the matter in September, the Democratic Alliance sought and was granted leave to join the proceedings as an intervening party. It is not in dispute that the issues raised in this matter fall within the exclusive jurisdiction of this court. The main complaint on the merits relates to the Assembly's failure to fulfill its constitutional obligations. In terms of Section 167, sub 4 of the Constitution, only this court may determine whether Parliament has failed to fulfill a constitutional obligation. It follows that permission to bring the case directly to this court must be granted. The question whether the Assembly failed to make rules envisaged in Section 89 of the Constitution requires us to interpret that provision so as to establish whether it imposes the obligation the applicants claim the Assembly has not fulfilled. Section 89 provides the National Assembly, by a resolution adopted with a supporting vote of at least 2/3 of its members, may remove the President from office only on the grounds of A, a serious violation of the Constitution or the law, B, serious misconduct, or C, inability to perform the functions of office. In a judgment prepared by me, concurred in by my colleagues Cameron, Froneman, K3 Sitilwane, Kolapen, Mhlantla, and Teron, we observe that this provision empowers the Assembly alone to remove the President from office. We conclude that the Assembly may remove the President from office only if one of the grounds listed in the section is established. The section does not define the meaning of each ground. It does not tell us what is meant by a serious violation of the Constitution or the law, nor does it shed light on what a serious misconduct is. What emerges from a closer reading of the entire section is that the drafters of the Constitution left the details on these grounds to the Assembly to spell out. In our view, these details should be set out in the relevant rules. It is those rules which must state what the Assembly considers to constitute a serious violation of the Constitution or the law and serious misconduct. Without such rules, we conclude that it is impossible for Section 89 to be implemented. This brings us to the question whether, in the present form, the rules of the Assembly provide for the removal of the President in terms of Section 89. The respondent asserted that Rule 85 regulates the President's removal from office. The rule is not relevant. It prohibits members of the Assembly from impugning the integrity and dignity of other members during debates in the Assembly. This prohibition also protects the President during debates. Reference was also made to Rule 253, which provides for the establishment of ad hoc committees. It was argued that an ad hoc committee may be established to investigate and recommend to the Assembly on whether there was a breach of Section 89 sub 1, which was serious enough to warrant removal of the President from office. We hold that the ad hoc committee system is not suited to the requirements of Section 89. It does not have a set procedure for the committee to follow when it carries out its task. In terms of Rule 255, an ad hoc committee decides a matter before it by means of a consensus. A removal of the President from office may easily be frustrated in the ad hoc committee. Accordingly, we conclude that, properly interpreted, Section 89 implicitly imposes an obligation on the Assembly to make rules specially tailored for the removal of the President from office. By omitting to include such rules in its rules, the Assembly has failed to fulfill this obligation. The next question is whether the Assembly failed to hold the President accountable. The power to act in terms of Section 89 is conferred upon the Assembly alone. It is the Assembly which must determine first and foremost whether any of the grounds for the President's removal from office has been established. If such grounds exist, then the process envisaged in the section must be followed. For a removal to succeed, it must be supported by a 2/3 majority of the members of the Assembly. With regard to this question, the applicants have argued that since delivery of judgment by this court on 31 March 2016, the Assembly has failed to act against the President in terms of Section 89 of the Constitution. They contended that this court has held that the President had violated the Constitution. They argued that despite the seriousness of this violation, the Assembly has done nothing to hold the President to account. The determination of this part of the claim required this court to examine the steps taken to hold the President accountable after delivery of the judgment of 31 March 2016. It is not true that the Assembly has done nothing. As the respondents pointed out, question and answer sessions were held in the Assembly, motions of no confidence were tabled and debated and voted on. But these motions failed because they did not obtain the necessary support from within members. However, the crucial issue in our view is whether appropriate action contemplated in Section 89 was taken by the Assembly. We hold that the Assembly may not claim to have complied with Section 89 if the action it has taken was not the one envisaged in that section. The question and answer sessions and motion of no confidence are not action contemplated in Section 89. Motions of no confidence are tabled under Section 102 of the Constitution, which requires a simple majority for the motion to succeed, and it is not necessary to base such a motion on any ground. While the President may be removed from office by means of a motion of no confidence, such removal may only be based on Section 102 and not Section 89. What is left for consideration is the motion for the President's removal, which was tabled by the Leader of the Opposition on 31 March 2016. That motion was debated and voted on by members of the Assembly on 5 April 2016. A majority of those members voted against it. Consequently, the motion was defeated. What needs to be decided, in our view, is whether the processing of that very motion complied with the requirements of Section 89. If it did, that would be the end of the matter, because the section does not oblige the Assembly to remove the President from office even where the listed grounds are established. In our view, the processing of that motion did not comply with Section 89. The Assembly simply debated and voted on the motion. It did not satisfy itself that the violation of the Constitution on which the motion was based was of the kind contemplated in the section. Therefore, we conclude that the Assembly did not hold the President to account as was required by Section 89. Section 237 of the Constitution obliged the Assembly to fulfill its obligations diligently and without delay. As outlined here, the Assembly has failed to perform two of its obligations without delay. In a separate judgment prepared by the Deputy Chief Justice, Zondo, concurred in by the Chief Justice, Madlanga J. and Zondi A.J., he concludes that the Assembly had put in place a mechanism that could be used effectively for the removal of the President from office in terms of Section 89. He holds that an ad hoc committee may be established to undertake the process envisaged in the section. Therefore, he concludes that the Assembly has fulfilled the obligation to make the removal of the President from office under Section 89. With regard to the question whether the Assembly has failed to hold the President accountable, the Deputy Chief Justice concludes that this was done in terms of the motion of 31 March 2016. He reasons that since this court had already declared that the President had violated the Constitution, there was no need for the Assembly to satisfy itself that the President had committed a serious violation. He concludes that in the present circumstances, there was nothing to be investigated by the Assembly. All that was left was for the motion to be debated and voted on. According to him, the motion was processed in compliance with the relevant section. In his judgment, the Chief Justice concurs in the judgment of the Deputy Chief Justice. With regard to the majority judgment, the Chief Justice holds for various reasons that the approach by the majority trenches upon the doctrine of, the Chief Justice has just handed over to me a document that I had just summarized. He would like it to be read into the record. In his concurrent judgment, the Chief Justice characterizes the majority judgment as a textbook case of judicial overreach, a constitutionally impermissible intrusion by the judiciary into the exclusive domain of Parliament. He holds that it is irreconcilable with the dictates of separation of powers and context-sensitive realities to prescribe an inquiry to the National Assembly as the only mechanism for determining the existence of a ground of impeachment, and that it is just as insensitive to this doctrine to hold that an impeachment ground must always be determined before the debate and voting on a motion of impeachment could take place, and to direct the Assembly to make rules that would effectively regulate the process as so prescribed. This, he says, is resoundingly negated by the deposition of most of applicants to the effect that seriousness of the constitutional violation in relation to Kandla is self-evident and well-established, and their acceptance that existing mechanisms could be used to hold the president accountable for Kandla. Without any inquiry, these parties represented in the Assembly were able to determine the existence of an impeachment ground. He concludes in this regard that it is constitutionally impermissible for a court to order Parliament to do what it is already doing in circumstances where it has not identified any deficiency with that parliamentary process. The second judgment's inability or failure to confront squarely the issues pertinently raised by the first and this judgment in relation to the very purpose of an inquiry and its alleged indispensability is, in the view of the centrality of the inquiry to the declaratory order, most concerning. An inquiry has a clear purpose to serve. It is to unearth the unknown or ascertain the unclear. He contends that it is a purposeless exercise to hold an inquiry, even if the already available documented or otherwise recorded information could be sufficient for the purpose of determining the existence of a ground of impeachment. There is, in his view, a striking similarity between determination of the existence of a ground for impeachment and of a ground relied on for a desired court outcome. In High Court opposed motion proceedings, parties file affidavits and annex supporting documents to help the court resolve even highly complex legal or constitutional issues. Similarly, this court exercising its direct access or exclusive jurisdiction has routinely resolved very intricate constitutional issues. This mechanism has been most effectively and impressively employed without the need to resort to any inquiry or investigation before argument in court and the decision. Courts are themselves, therefore, not required to always determine grounds for the order sought or resolve complex constitutional issues only through a process of calling witnesses to testify and have their versions tested. And they do not ordinarily have to predetermine the existence of any ground before argument or a decision on the issue presented for determination. By parity of reasoning, it must be constitutionally permissible and practicable for another arm of the state to properly determine the existence of a ground of impeachment either through an inquiry or sheer reliance on the abundance of documented or otherwise recorded evidential material, in brackets, motion proceedings equivalent, readily available to it. For these reasons, Mogoeng CJ holds the view that the majority has imposed its preference on Parliament in circumstances where separation of powers forbade it. In his judgment, Froneman J. concurs in the majority judgment and disagrees that that judgment breaches the principle of separation of powers. In the result, the following order is made. 1. This court has exclusive jurisdiction to hear the application. 2. The failure by the National Assembly to make rules regulating removal of a president in terms of Section 89, Sub 1 of the Constitution constitutes a violation of this section and is invalid. 3. The National Assembly must comply with Section 237 of the Constitution and make rules referred to in paragraph 2 without delay. 4. The failure by the National Assembly to determine whether the President has breached Section 89 Sub 1A or B of the Constitution is inconsistent with this section and Section 42(3) of the Constitution. 5. The National Assembly must comply with Section 237 of the Constitution and fulfill the obligation referred to in paragraph 4 without delay. 6. The National Assembly and the President must pay costs of the application jointly and severally, including costs of two counsel where applicable. I hand down the judgment.
Thank you. Thank you. The court will adjourn.
Please rise.
Well, indeed, judgment has just been handed down with regards to the Assembly failing to comply, of course, with its two obligations. We will be unpacking this and more. For now, though, let's take a short break.
Violence against women, it also talks to such behavior where teachers, instead of educating kids and give them dignity, they strip them of their dignity.
The First Lady.
The First Lady, her action, it's just unacceptable. I must say that it cannot be condoned. If I had it my way, I would say we had to act and make sure that he goes to jail.
This scourge is not ceasing.
The angry people, the intolerant, it's so huge. So then the scourge finds itself within that particular environment. You cannot say that it's a standalone. It's influenced by social ills, economic challenges.
Join me in Port Sedu live every Monday to Thursday at 17:30.
Africans are increasingly using digital platforms for life, work and play. Information is key for us. We live in an information age. We live in the digital age.
I'm mostly on WhatsApp because not all my friends have iPhones, so they don't have FaceTime.
On Network, we tell you about Africa's technology and social media landscape.
And some here are using the internet to raise political concerns.
Some of the exposés on political issues come from what you call your diasporic online media.
Africans are also using technology to create. For African technology and social media news, join me, Phumelele Zondi, on Network every Sunday at 9 p.m.
Well, proceedings regarding a ruling on President Zuma's impeachment were underway at the Constitutional Court. They have just concluded. The judge had brought forward 4 judgments in preparation for the ruling. Well, these included the violation of the Constitution by the President, the removal of the President from his office, motion of no confidence, and failed accountability for his question and answer session in Parliament. In studio, we will be joined by Lawson Naidu, who is an Executive Secretary at the Council for the Advancement of South African Constitution, and he also works as a law consultant. We will be crossing over to him. For now, though, I'm joined by Lwando Xaso, who has been unpacking throughout the course of the morning what we were going to be expecting, and of course now sitting here and actually handing the judgment down. So essentially, take us through the points in the section 89 to which the judgment had referred to.
Thanks. So we just listened to the judges of the Constitutional Court. We also still just unpacking the judgment ourselves. As the judge said, there are 4 judgments, and I'll have to also go home and completely immerse myself in them. But what people should know is that the Constitution is a skeleton, so to speak. It can't make provision for every little incident, right? It makes very broad rules in terms of how we are all to conduct ourselves. And the point of having a constitutional court is to give us sort of the meat of the Constitution. What do these sections mean? And when it comes to Parliament, we saw this last year as well. Was it this year? Sorry, with the, it's been such a long year. We saw it with the secret ballot case, that, what do the rules of Parliament have to say about the Speaker's obligation to order, does she have the power to order a vote of no confidence in secret? And the Constitutional Court, they was also very cautious and not overreaching and saying that order a secret ballot. It said these are the considerations that you have to take into account when you're deciding if a vote should be in secret, and that's your own impartiality, the conditions of the time, is it a peaceful time or not, and transparency and things like that. And we saw that those rules created by the Constitutional Court force the Speaker to head in a certain direction. So the court nudges, but it can't really tell people to do a certain act. So they have to be very cautious of the separation of powers, and I think this judgment really is an indication of that cautiousness. And I mean, the Chief Justice and the Deputy Chief Justice, they had their own rulings, but the majority basically said that we have Section 89 of the Constitution. It deals with the impeachment of the President. It says Parliament may remove the President. Impeachment doesn't appear in that section, so you may remove the President if there's serious misconduct or serious violation of the Constitution. So as the judge explained, Judge Jafta explained, is that we had the Constitutional Court hand down a judgment last year in March, saying that the President failed to uphold and defend the Constitution. Essentially, that's breaching your constitutional obligations. And the court was very cautious not to say the result should be that the President should be impeached. They said that we understand our judicial limitations. How the President is removed from office, we cannot prescribe that. That is up to Parliament, how the process is done. So in April, as he explained, the National Assembly held a vote of no confidence, and it failed, right? And now with the parties coming again to the Constitutional Court, as Jafta called it, this is a sequel to that judgment of 2016. So what they've said is that yes, you held a vote, yes, you have Q&As, yes, you've done certain things following our judgment of last year, but was it enough? And did it meet Section 89 requirements? Section 89 requirements are different. You may remove for misconduct and for violation of the Constitution. But what failed to happen in Parliament in April, following the court's judgment last year when they voted, is there wasn't a decision as to the nature of the president's violation of the Constitution. Was it a serious violation? The court said that's not for us to determine if this is serious. A breach is a breach, right?
Yeah.
And Parliament doesn't have rules and mechanisms in place to determine that. And that's where Parliament's failure has come in now, and that was the nub of the judgment.
Yeah.
You have failed to fulfill your constitutional obligations to create these rules to guide you when you are voting for impeachment or discussing an impeachment. So I think for me this is a welcome judgment because it requires certain rigor from Parliament. And a lot of people have been criticizing Parliament for being inactive. And that's also due to our constitutional makeup, right? That the majority of the members of the National Assembly belong to the majority party. So there's this thing of towing the party line, that you're going to do what your party says, not what the people want you to do. And for me, parliamentarians are public representatives of society. So this development in our constitutional jurisprudence that we've seen all year, or in the past 5 years or so, is that we are seeing that the Constitutional Court is requiring more from other branches of government. You need to work, you need to scrutinize the president's conduct, you need to create rules around this impeachment. It's just not enough to hold a vote and call it a day. So for me, this engagement that's required by the National Assembly can only benefit our democracy. So I'm very happy about it.
Indeed. I'm going to bring Mr. Lawson Naidu, who is joining us also into the conversation. A very good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, Mr. Naidu. What are your sentiments and what are your views that you've drawn from the judgment that has been handed down?
A very, very important judgment in the context of the development of our constitutional democracy in South Africa. The fact that there were 4 judgments prepared with 7 judges upholding the application by the political parties shows that there was a serious level of engagement amongst within the court on this very important issue. As has been said already, I think the key issue is that what the court has found is that Section 89 of the Constitution, which provides for the removal of the president or impeachment, is meaningless unless there is an adequate mechanism in place by Parliament in order to give effect to that, to make it real. Parliament has failed to do that, and in effect, although it was described as a sequel to the Nkandla judgment, this ruling today, I think, finds that Parliament has been in contempt of the Constitutional Court. Because in addition to holding in the Nkandla judgment that the President had violated the Constitution, the Court also held at that time that Parliament had failed to fulfill its constitutional obligations. And now, once again, the Constitutional Court has found that Parliament has, even after that judgment, failed to do anything to fulfill its constitutional obligations. So I think this is a bleak day for Parliament, having found once again to have failed to uphold the Constitution. And I think it's also very important that the court made reference specifically to Section 237 of the Constitution.
I'm going to interrupt you there. We do believe that the EFF is giving their reaction to the judgment. We will be coming back to this. Let's cross live to the Constitutional Court.
Failed to hold him accountable, and we can't wait any other day longer. We need to be in Parliament in no less than 30 days before the State of the Nation address of 2018.
Thank you. Let's take questions. 1, 2. Let's start with number 2.
What went first for a long time? Aldrin goes first.
Aldrin?
It's Aldrin St-Pierre from the SABC. This court ruling is more on the National Assembly and the conduct, I guess, of the Speaker as well. Will the EFF push for a motion of no confidence in the Speaker, because continuously the court has been ruling against her conduct, and this time again the court has ruled against her conduct. So it's not just about President Jacob Zuma, but also the Speaker of Parliament.
Well, I think one thing at a time. We just have to look at the judgment and talk to the Speaker, and she will do the honorable thing. It's not necessarily about her. It is actually about the 269 voting titles of the ANC, which are in the backbench of the National Assembly. We look for of the Speaker. She cannot defy the highest court in the land.
Number two.
Please could you extrapolate more on your opinion that it's an abuse of power by the Chief Justice? This was a dissenting judgment, which means that the Constitutional Court justices were not unanimous in the decision that they handed down to her.
It is unprecedented for those who have been in courts throughout their existence and the existence of the courts for such irritation to be displayed by the holder of the highest office of the courts, who actually is trying to impose his own judgment into record. He actually also read a minority judgment, and he actually summarized it in terms of the third person when he was reading that minority judgment. Similarly, his own judgment should actually also have been dealt with in the way he dealt with the minority judgment in the earlier Africans Must Fall judgment. And we really have to look at the decorum and the conduct of the Chief Justice. He cannot just be over-celebrated. Otherwise, we are going to have a beast and a monster out of him. He must be called to order as and when he conducts himself in a manner not expected of the leader of the judiciary.
Are there any further questions?
That's it. Thank you very much. Let's meet in Parliament in Cape Town, not later than the State of the Nation address of the 2018. Thank you.
Can I just quickly on the 30 days, how do you come up with the 30 days that this must happen before the State of the Nation address? Can you just explain that to us?
Maybe if you look at your calendar, it's just comes closer to that. It's not necessarily that the court said in 30 days or so, but at least it's come closer to the 8th of February, effective from today, the 29th of December.
So the State of the Nation will not happen up until these things have been adhered to?
Let's leave it to the processes that will be unfolded beginning from today up until closer to the State of the Nation address of 2018, and hopefully that sense will prevail to the ruling party, to the Speaker, and the rest involved in protecting and keeping the President.
Are you happy, are you satisfied as the EFF that you got what you want, and how long is your prediction, or at least what's your prediction for President Jacob Zuma's future?
Well, we exactly came to the court to ask for the court to make a declaration that the National Assembly has failed to fulfill its duties, and that's what exactly the court said. And we have got everything that we needed from the court, including cost, by the way. So we are very much satisfied. As to how long Zuma will survive, we will leave it to the Speaker. We will leave it to the ruling party, and hopefully if we give them a benefit of doubt, maybe some sense and miracles may visit their conscience before the State of the Nation address of 2018.
Okay, thank you guys. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you so much.
Yes. The main applicants in this matter.
Up until the State of the Nation address, as you can hear, that they've set aside 30 days, saying that within said 30 days they want the National Assembly, which of course is in recess, to ensure that it implements these rulings and the findings of the Constitutional Court. But quite importantly, as I emphasized to Godrich Gadi, the Secretary General of the EFF as well, is that this court case is not really about President Jacob Zuma, but it's more about the conduct of the Speaker of the National Assembly. And yet again, it has been found that the National Assembly has failed in its constitutional obligation to have oversight and hold the President and the Executive accountable. The court has also indicated that it already had made a ruling that the President has violated the Constitution, considering the ruling that it gave on the Nkandle matter, that the President failed to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution. Now we'll have to wait and see exactly how Parliament will be implementing this. quite important as well in this judgment is that the judgment did indicate that an ad hoc committee would not be the right forum to hold the president accountable. But how does this then plan out going forward? What sort of committee would the judges be, or does this judgment envisage? And how exactly would the opposition parties ensure that the president is held accountable? This may be a judgment also on the conduct of the Speaker of Parliament to hold the president accountable. It's not so much about the legal implications thereof, but quite importantly, what does it mean for politics? What does this ruling mean for the ANC? Yet another ANC deployee, the Speaker of Parliament, has been found to be in the wrong, and the President Jacob Zuma was not held to accountable. What will the ANC do now that there's this ruling that has been set down? It's back to you in studio.
Thank you very much. Our reporter on the ground, Aldrin Samper, taking us through the court ruling that had been handed down by Judge Jafta. Let's cross back to Mr. Naidu, but in just a bit though, for now let's have a listen once again to the ruling that was just handed down a couple of moments ago.
1. This court has exclusive jurisdiction to hear the application. 2. The failure by the National Assembly to make rules regulating removal of a president in terms of Section 89, Sub 1 of the Constitution constitutes a violation of this section, and is it valid? 3. The National Assembly must comply with Section 237 of the Constitution and make rules referred to in paragraph 2 without delay. 4. The failure by the National Assembly to determine whether the President has breached Section 89 Sub 1A or B of the Constitution is inconsistent with this section and Section 42(3) of the Constitution. 5. The National Assembly must comply with Section 237 of the Constitution and fulfill the obligation referred to in paragraph 4 without delay. 6. The National Assembly and the President must pay costs of the application jointly and severally, including costs of to counsel where applicable.
We're still in discussion. In studio, I'm joined by Lwando Qaso, of course, a constitutional analyst, as well as a law representative and consultant expert, Mr. Lawson Naidu. Going back to you, Mr. Naidu, you were mentioning the 4 judgments. Let's actually unpack that. Is it a possibility that President Jacob Zuma could be found guilty of all these 4 judgments against him, or rather the National Assembly?
Indeed. I think that the court has made reference to the fact that the president was found to have failed to fulfill his constitutional responsibilities, and in particular to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution in the Nkandla judgment. Parliament has failed to hold him to account. There have been other cases where the president's conduct has been found wanting, and the court, I think, is expressing some kind of exasperation with Parliament's failure to adequately and effectively hold the president to account. As we know, in terms of the Constitution, Parliament has the primary responsibility to hold the president to account. And the court has said that in terms of the question and answer sessions, in terms of the motions of no confidence that we've seen, those are not an adequate mechanism that is envisaged under Section 89, which provides for the impeachment process. And that Parliament therefore must put in place these rules, and that it must do so as a matter of some urgency. And I think that's an important, again, aspect of this judgment, is that the court is saying to Parliament, you should have done this already, you haven't, now you have to do it. And I think that also then calls into question the fitness of the Speaker to continue to hold office, because the Speaker, as the head of the institution, the head of the legislature, must now also take responsibility for Parliament's failure to act.
Indeed. Bring it back here in studio. What does this now essentially mean for Parliament going forward and the dynamics that we can expect to see?
I think for me, I was just thinking, what does it mean for the president? If I'm him this morning, I don't think I'm bothered very much. I think this is a great judgment. It's democracy in motion. It is the development of our constitution. It's requiring more from Parliament and our parliamentarians, but practically it comes down to a vote. Let's say the rules are put in place, Parliament reconvenes and they put rules in place for 89. I think what's interesting is also thinking about it in terms of the secret ballot vote. You know, probably going to have another voting process, and now we have all this jurisprudence to inform that voting process. It becomes political at the end of it, because it's about, you know, the bartering behind the scenes regarding this voting process. But if you have a secret ballot, and we saw the shift in the last secret ballot that we have for the no confidence vote, that the numbers were actually closer than what we thought. So I'm very interested to see how close the numbers would be, you know, following the development of these rules and all of that. And I think it's still some time before we see the end of this process that has been started, I think, since 2014.
But would the new dispensation in the ANC not now play a new and vital role?
I'm not sure about internal ANC politics and what the new dispensation means. I'm much more concentrating on, you know, the law, what it says, what it requires. And that's why I was saying to you that at the end of the process, it becomes political. You know, I don't know the kind of shifts that have happened since 2 weeks ago, since Matric. So I don't know what the numbers look like for an impeachment vote when it does happen down the line. But I think it's a big development in terms of accountability, you know, of Parliament, holding the president accountable, and also the National Assembly acting in terms of what the Constitution requires it to do. So they're getting more guidance from the Constitutional Court in terms of how to do their job. And I think for me, that's the win today. But in terms of a tangible benefit, you know, as in waking up the next day and there's a change in regime, just hold on for a bit, yeah.
Your views, Mr. Naidu, on that, on the comments from Lando Kaso, as well as the dynamics that we've also now seen play out between the Constitutional Court and to somewhat the limitations that they've withheld with regards to what can actually take place in the National Assembly?
Well, I think the key thing is to separate the sort of the legal and the political processes here, and to separate the issue from President Zuma as well. So I think the judgment is important in terms of strengthening constitutional democracy, plugging gaps that exist. So, you know, the failure to have a mechanism in place to deal with Section 89 is an important thing, not just for the immediate issue around President Zuma, but for the longer term to ensure that our constitution is robust. So I think it's important that this judgment speaks to that and deals with that issue. Obviously, the political implications of this judgment are also significant, because there is now pressure from within the ANC on President Zuma to step down, and this will certainly add to that pressure from within the ANC. How they deal with it, we will have to wait and see. But there certainly can be no doubt that this will certainly add to the pressure on President Zuma to step down, because an impeachment process, although it would require a 2/3 majority, not just a simple majority as a motion of no confidence does. The other aspect of an impeachment process is that the president will lose benefits to office, such as pension and so on, if he were to be removed through an impeachment process. So that is something I'm sure that President Zuma and perhaps even the ANC would want to avoid.
Definitely. Let's have a look at some of the tweets from some of our viewers that have been giving their commentary on the judgment. This one coming in from Kaya saying, well, today is a good day for the Court to make such ruling, affirming the majority understood language as a primary base language of instruction. Well, of course, that is referring to the Constitutional Court judgment that was handed down just before the Zuma impeachment judgment with regards to the language policy. Well, Godric Gadi says that they are concerned by the visible irritation shown by a Chief Justice, and his insistence for his judgment to read out in full shows an abuse of power. Well, the Chief Justice knew the hallowed halls of the Constitutional Court. That one coming in from Lucanio, as we had been seeing the reactions of the judges. Our Constitutional Court justices should not be criticized for having different views. This is a sign of healthy democratic system where uncomfortable issues are debated and resolved. That one coming in from Amanzi. Christus says the National Assembly and the President must pay costs. And of course, that was also included in the judgment, that the cost should be included. This one coming in from D. Tumza. Lawyer friends, please summarize to us mere mortals what the Constitutional Court is saying. Of course, those were also some of the sentiments here in studio in trying to unpack the law wording and jargon and trying to understand everything. But I have you in studio and you're taking me through those Section 89s and 102s. What else are we expecting coming out from this?
I think, first of all, I'd encourage everyone to get a copy of the judgment, because it's just been handed down, meaning that it should be available online. And if you don't have access online, I'm sure there are other mechanisms to get yourself a hard copy. And what I appreciate about the Constitutional Court and matters like this is that it elevates discussion. As I saw on the tweets right now, people are starting to talk a certain way, you know, and they're very interested in the state of our democracy and in these cases. And for me, that engagement is something that I'm passionate about, and it's something that Constitution Hill, just beyond even just the court, is passionate about, to have people engage for themselves rather than depending on what I'm saying or what other experts are saying. Like, I can only give you the surface of it, but hopefully people go into depth and they read the judgment for themselves, and hopefully it is reader friendly. So I can't wait to get my copy and to read it and to fully consider it, because right now I'm sort of giving my comments, you know, top of my head,
trying to unpack
but I haven't
everything and process.
seen the hard copy and gone through all the 4 judgments and what it means and all of that. But just to summarize, is that this is requiring more from our parliamentarians. The Constitution is a skeleton. They have to flesh it out by having rules before they can pursue any action in terms of Section 89, which is the impeachment provision. Even though the word impeachment doesn't appear on there, it's a mechanism where Parliament may remove the President for serious violation of the Constitution. But what a serious violation is has to be determined by the rules. And at the end of that is a political process where they have to vote. And the court has said that it can't say to Parliament, the only rational outcome of that vote has to be impeachment. So that's a democracy. A lot of our branches of government are constrained, and that's where we come in as citizens. At the end of it, you have to go and vote if you don't like something. Definitely.
I'm going to bring you into the conversation here, Mr. Naidu. What do you make of those comments that we've also seen many young people also engaging towards what they're describing democracy and growth towards democracy in judiciary systems, as well as hopefully what we'll be seeing in Parliament?
Well, absolutely. I think, you know, people are engaging in the issue. You know, as my colleague just said, you know, we need to study these judgments. There are 4 judgments that were prepared by, you know, different judges, 2 on each side, 2 supporting the application and 2 opposing it. And the court was split by a majority of 7 against 4. So, you know, there's obviously, there's texture and depth to the judgments that were delivered, dealing with complex, very complex issues. I think, as the dissenting judgment of the Chief Justice indicates, you know, the issue of judicial overreach and the separation of powers is an important one, and the courts are careful to try and avoid usurping the powers of Parliament. But ultimately, it is the responsibility of the Constitutional Court, in a constitutional democracy such as ours, to be the final arbiter of what the Constitution says. And I think what the court has done here is to give some direction to Parliament as to how it needs to fulfill its constitutional obligations in respect of Section 89. But the court has also, as I said earlier, expressed its, you know, I think its disappointment with Parliament, not having done this already following the Nkandla judgment, and is now saying to Parliament, you must do this as a matter of urgency. So I think the court has, in my opinion, has found a healthy balance between respect for the rules of Parliament and to say Parliament must make those rules, and not to be afraid to strengthen the Constitution, which is what I think this judgment is really about today. It's about strengthening our constitutional democracy.
Definitely. Now, Mr. Naidu, earlier the Constitutional Court ruled in favour of the University of the Free State's language policy. The UFS adopted a new language policy in March of 2016, which replaced Afrikaans and English as parallel mediums of instructions, as well as instills English as the primary. Let's listen in and let's discuss that in a bit. Right, so I was hoping to get a reaction from earlier, but I would like to ask you, what is your view on the language policy judgment that had been handed down in having English as the only medium of instruction at UFS?
Well, again, I mean, I haven't read the judgment, or nor did I really understand or follow the reasoning of the court. But the actual finding, I think, is an important one. Is basically saying that the university has the autonomy to put in place a single language policy there, and that policy is not in conflict with the principles of the Constitution. So I think it's, again, it's another difficult issue, similar to the issue of separation of powers, about looking at the autonomy of independent institutions such as universities and their rights, to exercise rights that derive from the Constitution in terms of language policy.
Let's go back to the judgment and listen in just a bit further.
The implementation of any language policy that undermines these constitutional and policy objectives has to be desisted from. And the university is in effect saying that President Mandela's worst nightmares have come to pass. The use of Afrikaans has unintentionally become a facilitator of ethnic or cultural separation and racial tension. And this has been so from around 2005 to 2016. Its continued use would leave the results of white supremacy not being redressed but kept alive and well. It is for that reason that a policy revision or intervention has since become necessary. The link between racially segregated lectures and racial tension has not been denied. While it may be practicable to retain Afrikaans as a major medium of instruction, it certainly cannot be reasonably practicable when race relations are poisoned thereby. Logic dictates that if there was a known way of addressing racial tension and other concerns relating to the use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, it would not only have been stated by the aggrieved parties, but also implemented. So, the challenge based on the correct meaning of reasonably practicable must fail. This then leaves us with the alternative grounded on the alleged inconsistency between the ministerial policy framework and the university policy. The university's impugned language policy is challenged on the basis that it flouts the essence of the ministerial policy and was therefore not developed subject to it. In particular, it is contended that the university's policy has strayed from the ministerial policy framework by phasing out Afrikaans as one of the two dominant languages of instruction, when it should be retaining and not eroding it. That, by the way, is essentially the basis on which the High Court ruled in favor of AfriForum and Solidarity.
Indeed, Mr. Naidoo, just hearing just a bit of the clip from the earlier judgment being handed down, what are the main sentiments and points of importance that you've drawn?
Well, again, I think, as that clip demonstrated, the court was grappling with competing constitutional provisions about equity and access, as well as government policy in terms of what the ministerial policy framework, and whether what the University of the Free State did in removing dual language instruction in English and Afrikaans, reducing it to English only, was sustainable in the context of that government policy, as well as within, as I said, competing constitutional provisions. And I think, speaking to the history of Afrikaans, its divisiveness, and the inclusivity that is required in a democratic South Africa. So I think it's, again, it's a judgment, it's a progressive judgment that takes us forward and looks at the broader issues rather than simply looking at it narrowly from the perspective of preservation of Afrikaans as a language of instruction.
Indeed, your views on that, Wando?
I mean, I have my own personal views, having gone to a university that used both English and Afrikaans, and I understand the divisiveness of that and have my own personal views about sort of the elevation of Afrikaans as a language and all of that. But interestingly, Froneman, Cameron, and I think Pretorius had their own dissenting judgment, and it wasn't on the merits of the case. It was on process. And I want to grapple with that aspect as well, that should the case have been sent back to the High Court, and I find that element of process very interesting. A lot of the times people focus on substance, and we're very happy with an outcome. But I think we should also grapple with how a case ends up in the Constitutional Court and, you know, the hearing that it's afforded and all of that. So that's why I would encourage people to read the entire judgment, even the dissenting judgments, just to understand and not reach conclusions and say, hey, you know, the white judges of the Constitutional Court didn't agree with the majority. Just inform yourself as to what specifically they did not agree with.
Indeed. Thank you very much for your views. Of course, joining us from Cape Town, Mr. Lawson Naidu, Executive Secretary at the Council for Advancement, joining us via Cape Town. We thank you very much for your time this morning, as well as in studio, Luando Klaso, who is a constitutional lawyer and analyst. We thank you very much for joining us and unpacking all those nitty-gritty law terminologies that everybody was trying to understand as judgment was being handed down. Before we wrap up, let's have a look at the continuing comments that have been coming in with regards to the judgments that had been handed down. Well, that's not what the court said. Rules need to be developed first to manage the impeachment process, right or wrong. This one coming in from Judge President. And this one says, do so many cases or applications asking the court to rule on matters mean that our South African constitution is deficient and vague, or that there are people or groups who deliberately violate our constitution. Hashtag SA Constitution 66. This one coming in from Voice O Reason. I'm so thrilled by the court decision on Afrikaans. As a medium at UFS, feels like a personal victory and a step towards correcting the wrongs of this country, baby steps. Of course, giving you both views coming from the Constitutional Court that had been handed down with regards to the language policy, as well as the Zuma impeachment proceedings. And for now, though, let's have a look at some other news making headlines. The Council for Quality Assurance in General and Further Education and Training, Malusi, is also beginning a press briefing with regards to Matric results.
As a Council for Quality Assurance in General and Further Education and Training, Malusi has the national duty to ensure that high-quality educational standards are maintained across all assessment bodies, both private and public. In line with this view, Umalusi Council is always careful to approach the work of all assessment bodies with the same rigor and determination. Today's media briefing is also a pinnacle of the hard work done by Umalusi staff and members of Council in ensuring that Umalusi does, in fact, deliver on its mandate as a Council for Quality Assurance in General and Further Education and Training. Colleagues, important stakeholders are the learners and their parents, who are eager to know whether Umalusi has carried out the necessary processes that ensure the credibility of their exit-level qualifications. I sincerely thank all Umalusi appointed moderators and monitors, members of the Assessment Standards Committee, as well as Umalusi staff for putting immense effort in assuring the quality of assessment and examinations. The various units at Umalusi have contributed significantly to the outcomes of these examinations. Staff in these units have displayed commitment, patience, and dedication under stressful conditions and challenges for an extended period. Their unremitting hard work has indeed paid dividends. Our first preference is to accept raw marks as a fair reflection of learner performance. In general, no adjustment should exceed 10% of the total mark of the paper or the historical average. It should be obvious from the above two principles that one cannot have a fixed level of adjustment. An appropriate scaling operation must be employed in order to be consistent with these principles of standardization. In instances where raw examination marks are accepted, it is because, first, the examination has been adjudged to have been of an appropriate level. Second, the learner performance is in line with the average historical learner performance profile in that subject. Third, the conduct and management of the examination in the subject was not compromised. Council needs to satisfy itself that all assessment bodies have been subjected to the following quality assurance measures before it can approve the publication of results, moderation, and approval of question papers. Verification of the moderation of internal assessments, monitoring of the conduct of examinations, monitoring of the marking process, verification of marking, standardization of results. With regard to marking, Umalusi conducted the monitoring of marker selection and related processes with a view to improve the practices followed by various provincial departments of education and various independent assessment bodies. Also, Umalusi conducted an audit of appointed markers in all assessment bodies, including in the provincial departments of education. Furthermore, Umalusi observed the following processes in the provinces visited and in all independent assessment bodies that have been visited. The process of marker selection, the training of various levels of marking. Lastly, Umalusi is satisfied that in general, all assessment bodies, including provincial departments of education, have enhanced their criteria for the appointment of markers as stated in the Education Labour Relations Council Resolution number 6 of 1997 as amended in 2001. Also, there was notable improvement in the quality of question papers submitted to Umalusi for approval. Professor Volmik will say more on this positive development in his presentation later. Be that as it may, we have met with all assessment bodies in the past few days and pointed out to them the need to address some areas of non-compliance which require their undivided attention going forward. Furthermore, Umalusi notes with great deal of disappointment that some public protests which were organized during the last few months of this year happened at a time when our learners were busy with their examinations. Unfortunately, such disruptions can only have a negative effect on the emotional and psychological well-being of our learners at a crucial time of writing the most important examination in their lives. This year, the South African Comprehensive Assessment Institute, SACAI, which is an independent assessment body provisionally accredited by Umalusi to administer the National Senior Certificate examinations, administered its NSC exams for the 4th time this year. Another new independent assessment body, Benchmark Assessment Agency, which is also in the process of obtaining accreditation from Umalusi, ran a pilot of its 3rd GTC examinations in November. Benchmark Assessment Agency's results were also subjected to Umalusi's quality assurance and standardization processes.
Before Umalusi can grant approval, it has to satisfy itself that there are no systemic irregularities. I repeat, no systemic irregularities. It doesn't mean that there are no irregularities, but if they are system-wide, it becomes a problem. There are always individual acts of dishonesty. That doesn't constitute a systemic problem. So we have to be sure that the examination is clear of any systemic irregularities, because those will undermine the integrity and the credibility of the examination process. And so we require from each assessment body a report on the irregularities, and I'm pleased to report that this year based on the evidence presented to Umalusi by the DBE, that the 2017 National Senior Certificate exams were largely incident-free. We know that there were a few disruptions, but on the scale they were fairly minor, and those disruptions were experienced in only certain parts of the country. I want to just point this out, that of particular significance is that this year there were no leakages of examination papers, none. And this attests to the success of the heightened vigilance and the rigid measures put in place by the DBE to ensure secure and incident-free examinations. Umalusi commends the Department of Basic Education and the provincial departments for working tirelessly to achieve this goal. I can't remember when last we were able to say there were no leakages.
Hello from the sports desk. Let's give you a concluding sports bulletin. Books and libraries are a necessity in any society, more so in townships where underdevelopment as a result of the past have meant that these communities are underserved in terms of knowledge. But then what happens when you exchange books for bicycles? This is what a creative initiative in Soweto is doing. Book a Bicycle. It's a bicycle tour company based in Orlando West that collects books through cycling. The books are donated to local township schools and libraries. The initiative offers discounted prices to clients who donate books through bicycle tours. Book a Bicycle was launched back in February of 2016. And for more on this and what Book a Bicycle is about, we are joined in the studio by Mpumi Mtinzo, who is the founder. Good morning and welcome to Newsroom.
Thank you very much for having me.
Share with us in detail, what is Book a Bicycle?
Yeah, all right. Book a Bicycle is basically a bicycle tour company, like you said, based in Soweto. So what we do is we offer people discounted prices for a bicycle tour around the Soweto, and then we collect all those books and donate them to local libraries and schools. So what we're trying to do is fill up libraries with books, basically.
Okay.
You know, yeah, in exchange for a nice Soweto experience through a bicycle.
So mainly people that you're dealing with would be tourists, I would assume.
Yes, that's the main target market. But we've created a package that includes locals, you know, that welcomes locals to come and cycle. You know, so our package is now we're trying to promote also Ikasi, like the whole township, you know, so we encourage people to come out. So we find creative ways to attract also local people, you know, yeah, not just only tourists.
Because I would assume that if you're dealing mainly with tourists, some of the books they would read would be more international books, yeah. and you surely want to have more South African authors and their books being read at these libraries and schools.
Yes, what happened is we got 10 books that were in a foreign language, you know, and one of those languages, it was German, you know. I'm sure people will love to have books about German, you know, read about Germany, but we're trying to promote local things, you know, and we decided to donate all the books to the Orlando West Children's Library. So children, they'll decide whether to learn Spanish or German when they grow up. But for now, we're just asking for books that can accommodate children.
It's a brilliant idea. Share with us how you came about such.
Well, in 2016, if you remember February, the whole Fees Must Fall campaign was still a hot topic, you know. So I wanted us to have something from the youth that we can contribute positively into the education system, basically, you know, because there were excuses that the youth is now, what they're doing is they're using Fees Must Fall as a way to escape writing exams, to study, to work hard and whatnot, you know. So I wanted us to have something more positive that we can contribute with. Yeah.
To date, how many books have you collected?
To date, we've collected 438 books. Out of that 438, 138 were donated at the Orange Farm Library. And then some of the books we divided between the Orlando Children's Library and the Orlando Children's Home.
Now, talk to us about the challenges that you faced since you came up with this idea, being a small company based in Soweto. What are some of the challenges that you've encountered trying to go ahead with this project?
Well, the challenges, honestly, will be competition. because anyone that Googles bicycle tours in Soweto, you know, they find that one specific guy.
Up, yeah?
Yeah, you know, they find that one specific person. So that guy is our competition. So he's a challenge, but also I look up to the guy.
But now, why not work with him in order to expand this? Because look, there's a bigger picture here. It's beyond the two companies, but mainly to almost make sure that all the kids in Soweto have access to books.
Yes, that he's part of our 2018 plans.
Good.
So going to the new year, we're looking at working with him because he also hosts like book reading and storytelling, and we have books. You know, so we might be able to come up with another creative way to involve the younger market. You know, like the children, basically.
If you ask me, Rex, if you have two big companies in Soweto, instead of fighting each other, rather you work with each other in order to achieve a bigger plan. But now let's also talk about what you're hoping to achieve with this project.
Well, like I said, we're trying to fill up the school libraries with books. So for now, we're mainly focusing on the Orlando West Children's Library, you know, because it's still new and they still need books. They're trying to get as many help as they can get. So now what we're trying to achieve is to fill up that library with books, you know, and then eventually we get the reading culture to be part of the norm, you know, with us, the youth especially.
Now, talk to us about those who'd like to contribute or donate books, but not really interested in going to Soweto to cycle. How do they donate their books? Or do you go around Joburg collecting books wherever people are willing to donate?
Yeah, just now, before Christmas, we collected books from this lady, Bianca, who didn't want anything to do with cycling, but she had books at her home and she was cleaning up her home. So we met up with her. So anyone that would like to donate books and doesn't want to do bicycle tours, then they're more than welcome to contact us, and then we come and collect wherever they are. Speaking about contacting you guys, talk to us about where people, our viewers, can get hold of you when they want to donate books and the likes. Yeah, we're on WhatsApp, which is easy and instant. So it's 061 371 9013. And also on Facebook, it's Book a Bicycle, all capital letters. And then on Twitter, it's book_a_bicycle.
Mpumi, all the best. We hope to chat to you in the near future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Of course, that's a bicycle. It's actually an initiative that was formed by the likes of Mpumi Ntinto, hoping to actually make sure that kids in Soweto get an opportunity to read some more. Stay with us. The show continues after this weather update.